I think this is it. I think this is good. Looks like we've got some people here. If somebody wants to say something in the chat to let me know that everybody's connected, but in the meantime, we can go ahead and get rocking and rolling here. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior enterprise advocate at GitHub. And today I'm really excited to chat about the future of generative AI and GitHub Copilot, and in particular, talk about GitHub Copilot X, what it is, what it isn't, what all it encompasses, and sort of lay out where we think the future of generative AI is going when it comes to supporting developers. Now, this is live, so please feel free to ask all the questions that you want. You may notice that I'm looking down periodically. That's because that's where my instance of the chat is down here on my second screen. So if you want to ask questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them on into the chat. Let me just open up the public screen. Here we go. And ensure that people are out there. Yes, no, maybe. There we go. Perfect. All right, here we go. Excellent. Okay, cool. So let's get on into it. Now, I want to talk real quickly about kind of what the flow is going to be today. So I'm going to go through a couple of intro slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit, kind of very quickly, about Copilot X. But before I really dig into Copilot X, I actually want to take a step back, talk a bit about GitHub Copilot, and then we'll go ahead and transition more into chatting about GitHub Copilot X. I'm also going to do an awful lot of demo today. I'm going to do an awful lot of coding because I think that that's really the best way to kind of understand what it is that we're looking to accomplish here and how it is that we think that this technology can help best support developers. So you're going to notice a lot of live demos. Now, what that also means is that I'll be doing live demos, and I'll be doing live demos with products that are still in development. So it is very likely that something is going to break. It is very likely that things might not work exactly as expected. And that's simply the nature of the beast. That's simply the nature of live demos, working with a beta product, and also working with AI, because it's not going to be deterministic. So things might behave a little bit differently. So for that, I apologize, but that's just sort of the way that things flow. So yeah, exactly. Somebody says nothing works as planned on a demo. Absolutely. And that will almost certainly be the case today. So with all that being said, let's kick right on into it. And I always like to start basically every presentation that I do with this slide right here. So I've been at GitHub for just shy of a year now. And this slide has changed about 4 times in the amount of time that I've been here. In particular, that top left number of 100 million developers. The reason that I like to start with this slide is because you don't hit 100 million developers by solely focusing in on business customers, by solely having developers that have been told, go use this tool. That instead, what happens is these are developers that are choosing to use GitHub. They're looking at the tool set that we've built, the tool set that we've provided, and they're going, hey, this gives me what I need to be most successful at my job. And that's because that is our primary focus. Our primary focus is around the developer, that we want to make sure that the developer has the best experience that's going to enable them to do their best work. And the biggest place that we've seen this change, certainly over the last couple of few months, has been when it comes to GitHub Copilot. Now, a couple of months ago, we announced this thing called GitHub Copilot X. And so let's talk a little bit about what GitHub Copilot X is. First of all, this is not a product. And it's also not necessarily a suite of products. But really what this is our vision that when we released GitHub Copilot, what we saw is the power of generative AI when it comes to code creation, of how it is that it can help support developers, how it can make developers more productive. And so we looked around and we went, okay, where else could this help? What other interfaces are developers looking for? And of course, one of the biggest places, and one of the places that we'll be spending the most amount of time on as we go through into our demos, is looking for some form of interactive chat. That chat GPT, of course, kind of set the world on fire, if you will, that there was a lot of excitement around this chatbot that I could go in, I could ask questions, and I could get human style answers back from that. And that's something that we as developers want to be able to have. We think interactively. And so being able to embed that right there inside of an IDE, right there where I'm writing code, that's going to be really big. That's going to be really important. And so that's one of the places where we're thinking about when it comes to generative AI and how it can support developers. So GitHub Copilot X is our vision. That's really what we were announcing there, is that these are all the different places that we see right now where generative AI can help out. So this is not an individual product. This is not a roadmap necessarily, but really it's an announcement of our vision. And we'll get into some of the specifics, some of the specific areas, and some of the potential products that you might see shipped out at some point. But the big thing that I want to make sure that I highlight here is that all of this is still very much in development. All of this is still being explored. So things very well may change, that some of the products that we talk about today might not actually get released, that some of the products that we talk about today might find themselves as part of separate products or might get rolled into other ones and so forth. So please do keep in mind that all of this is very, very, very early on. So before we get into GitHub Copilot X, though, I think we want to take a step back and talk about GitHub Copilot, because this is really kind of where it starts. So what is GitHub Copilot? GitHub Copilot is an AI pair programmer. That what GitHub Copilot will do is it will look at your context as you are writing code, as you are adding in comments, and start to make suggestions. That probably the most famous feature, the most powerful feature that we see when we're talking about GitHub Copilot is the ability to write a comment, that a developer can write out a comment, explain in natural language what it is that they're looking to do, what it is they're looking to accomplish. And then GitHub Copilot can then make a suggestion of the next line of code, of the next class, of the next function, of the next block of code that it thinks matches what that comment is looking for, and then basing it around the context that it sees. So for example, if it sees that you're using a particular naming strategy for your variables, or that you're using a particular tabbing strategy, or that you're always using a particular feature, that Copilot will then use that context to help shape the suggestions that it is then going to make. And what's really nice about that is that now that can allow me to offload boilerplate code. That can allow me to offload repetitive code. That when we think about writing code these days, we've got all of these frameworks that can really help us out, but there's only so much that you can abstract away, and that at some point you've got to write some level of code, and sometimes that winds up being relatively boilerplate. And so by being able to offload that out to GitHub Copilot, that allows me as the developer to be able to focus in on the bigger picture, to be able to solve the bigger problems, to allow me to better stay in the zone. One of the other very big places, and we'll actually come back and talk more about this later, is when it comes to test creation. That I don't think that there's an organization that's out there that feels really comfortable in the amount of tests that they have. And if we're being honest as developers, we don't necessarily always like writing tests. But at the end of the day, unit tests, end-to-end tests, they're just code. And since GitHub Copilot can write code for me, then it can in turn write my unit tests for me as well. That I can say, hey, create a unit test for this function, or create a set of tests that's going to test for this, this, and this. And GitHub Copilot can help me out in that arena. Now, the way that it does its magic behind the scenes here is as I'm doing things inside my IDE, it's going to send that context up to Copilot. It's going to use this custom model that we've built that's been trained out on billions of lines of publicly available code, and then eventually send those suggestions down for me right there inside of my IDE. So this is GitHub Copilot, and chances are you've probably already played around with this. You've probably already seen some demos on this, and hopefully, especially since you're connected, you're kind of excited about this. Now, GitHub Copilot is wonderful, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear here in highlighting that what I'm about to say is in no way, shape, or form trying to downplay or poke holes at GitHub Copilot. Because in my mind, I have not seen a developer tool that's been released in my programming lifespan that has had a greater impact on my productivity than GitHub Copilot. But that being said, GitHub Copilot is a tool, and it's specifically built for me writing code inside of my IDE. And so what we've seen is that's great, and it's wonderful, and it's wonderful to be able to support developers there. But that's not the only place that developers, I'm going to kind of kick ahead a little bit with my slides here. That's not the only place where developers are looking to interact with the system, or are maybe looking for the support of generative AI. So GitHub Copilot, as it's currently built, is a wonderful tool for my developer going in, writing code, and getting a little bit of support as they go. But let's talk a bit then about some of the other places that my developers are going to be interacting with the system and might be looking for some level of support. And so one of the biggest places is going to be Copilot for the CLI. So the power of Copilot, but they're inside of the terminal. I am a big fan of the CLI. I love using the CLI. And there's a few different reasons for this. That part of it is because I like to be able to create scripts that are going to make my life easier. Part of it's because I type relatively quickly. And so being able to just and get right to exactly what it is that I'm looking for is extremely powerful. And of course, another very big part of that is the fact that when we look at a lot of the frameworks that are out there, and especially for me, I'm primarily a web developer when it comes to development. There's so many CLI tools that are out there that basically every single web framework, it seems, has their own custom CLI. And so trying to remember all of those little bits of syntax can become a little bit of a pain. And so it'd be nice to be able to get some level of support right there as I'm doing my thing. So Adam says, no more man than Google. Man being, of course, the little help that you could get from the command line. That's sort of the goal here. That's where we're pointing to, is to be able to interact with generative AI right there on the CLI. So how does this work? Well, let's go ahead and take a real quick look at a demo here. So, let me see. Can I get my layout here to just go full screen and get rid of me? Let's see. No speaker videos. There we go. Okay, I knew I could do it. All right, just took me a minute to find it. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here. Let me just clear that out. Cool. So what I want to do is I want to create a front end React app. And I know that there's something about like create React app, but I can't remember exactly what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. So this is where Copilot for CLI can come into play. So this is going to start with 2 question marks. And now I can right here naturally describe what it is that I'm looking for. So I'm going to say create a React app with name front end, like that. And, uh-oh. Oh, give me 1 second here. Hold on 1 second. Apparently, the update that I made did not save like it should have. Not a problem. Give me 2 seconds here. There we go. Okay. Beautiful. All right. Sorry about that. See, I told you there was gonna be a bug somewhere along the way. All righty. Brew install. I love that. Yeah. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Here we go. So I'm going to go question mark. And then I'm going to say create React app with name front end. There we go. And then hit enter. So now here's what we're going to notice is the response that I get back is here's the command npx create React app front end. And then here's the explanation. So npx is used to run the command from a package without installing it. Create React app is a package that creates new React app. Front end is the name of the new app. And then you're going to notice down below that it asks me whether or not I want to run this command. So let's pause right here for a moment and let's talk a little bit about this. So you'll notice that I started up at the very top with a bit of natural language. This is what I'm looking to do. Copilot for CLI then comes back and says, okay, here's the command that I came up with. So npx create React app front end. And then it's going to give me the full explanation. One of the most important things that we always need to remember about generative AI is the fact that we're not always going to get back perfect answers. We can, in fact, sometimes get back incorrect information. Now, obviously, this is something that nobody wants. Obviously, uh, we, among many, every other company that's doing anything in the generative AI space, we are all working to help avoid that as best as we can. But the simple fact of the matter is that that can happen. And when we're talking about writing code, one of the very big things that we always want to remember is we need to keep in mind that any code that's been generated by generative AI should still go through all the normal processes. So there should be a human review, there should be automated code quality, there should be security reviews, like all of the things that you would normally do to your code. You want to do the exact same thing if it's GitHub Copilot that's writing that code. And in turn, the same thing holds true here is that whatever it is that this is going to come up with, I want to make sure that, yes, this is something that I want to run. And especially when we start talking about the command line, we definitely want to make sure that this is, in fact, going to do what I'm looking for it to do. That if all of a sudden I'm seeing an RMRF, that I want to, maybe be a little bit more cautious about that. So that's why it's really nice to see here's the command, here's the explanation. And so now I can go, oh, okay, yes, this is what I was looking for. I can see that's the explanation. All of this looks really good. Let me go ahead and run that command. Am I sure? Yes. Let's go ahead and run that. And then away it goes from there. UX appears to be quite similar to FigIO's AL CLI. Hayden says, I'm going to take your word for it. I honestly have not worked with any of the tools outside of GitHub. At some point, I really should go back and do that. But I honestly haven't yet gone back and done that. So that being said, can't wait to get your hands on it. Yeah, I can't wait for everybody to have access to it as well. There is back here, yeah. You'll notice that there's the waitlist URL right there. So you can go ahead and grab that. So cool. And it mentions that the description part is really important. Yeah, could not agree more. And then Patrick says the default pre-selected option should probably be revise query, not run command. So I absolutely hear that. But one thing that you might have noticed is that even though I hit enter on that, in fact, here, let's just do this. RM, RF, that front end that I just created. Let's just remove that real quick. And then let's rerun that GitHub command. Okay. So the default is run this command, and let me hit enter on this. And now what you're going to notice, it gives me this follow-up and says this will execute the suggested command in your shell. Am I sure? And the default is actually set to no here. So even though that default is to run the command, it's still giving me that follow-up of, hey, are you sure that you want to run this? And the default is going to be no. So I'm going to say yes, because I do want to run this. But the default is no. So we are putting in that little bit of a safety net there. So, yep. Yeah, so Michael linked directly out to the GitHub Next location. And in fact, let's do this. Sound effects help, by the way. Yeah, so you can notice right here, all of the different tools and so forth that we are building out. And one of those is Copilot for CLI, usable prototype, which is what I am currently playing around with. And then you can sign up for the waitlist there. So if you just do a search for GitHub Copilot, GitHub Next, do a search for GitHub Next, that will eventually get you to the page, or you can hit the link that Michael shared out, or you can, come on, hit that link that's right there. Let's see, Patrick asked the question, does GitHub Copilot or GitHub plan on allowing administrators to monitor request logs and so forth? So Code Whisperer offers a more in-depth access to control management, making it attractive to businesses. So I'm not able to speak to Code Whisperer because, again, I haven't played around with the product at all. When it comes to monitoring what's going on behind the scenes with requests and so forth, first thing that I want to mention is that these round trips right here, where we're setting up the question, setting up the context, sending back the suggestion, all of this is ephemeral, meaning that it's a one-off, that it's going to send up the information, send it back, and then none of that is going to be stored or logged anywhere. So none of your code requests, none of the code suggestions, none of that's going to be stored. There is usage data, however, that is stored. And that's going to include things like the number of requests that somebody makes, what the acceptance percentage is, what the acceptance is, but they go back and they modify the code, those types of things. Right now, we don't have a dashboard where you can see that. But if you reach out to your GitHub rep, they're going to be able to go pull that information for you. We are working on getting out a report screen where you could see that, but as of right now, that's not there. So being able to see the exact queries and so forth, that's not there, and that's very much a design decision because we want to keep all of that private. So all of that winds up going away. But as far as usage data goes, that is something that we can provide to you, and we are looking at building out a dashboard for that. So yeah, cool. All right. Let's see. So let's go back to my GitHub CLI. So you'll notice that it did in fact run create React app. As per, I think, almost any NPM script, there are some vulnerable packages that are installed. So we'd have to go in and update all of those. And then it just ran that normal npx command. So if I do an ls here, you'll notice that I now have that front end. And if I kick on over to Visual Studio Code, which I already had open, there is everything with my setup just as I would expect. So there's my front end, my public, my source, the git ignore that it created because it ran npx create app. So it's got all of that right there, all of that through the CLI. You can also do something like this. So I could say like git and maybe initialize directory. I'm going to leave that typo in there. Oops, is it just simply one? There we go. One question mark. Okay. So you'll notice that I did have a typo in there, which I left in there on purpose. I didn't type it on purpose, but I left it in there. And so now it'll come back and go, hey, you want git init? And then I could go ahead and run this command, hit yes, and then let it go from there. And sure enough, it ran git init. And you'll notice I got the little change right there. So pretty slick. So you are able to now start to get a little bit of interactive support through generative AI right there inside of your CLI. And it does support being able to make general requests. Oops, let me just get to the right slide here. Yeah, general requests for Git and then for the GitHub CLI as well using GH question mark. Now, again, this is a usable prototype. This is still very much in early development. So there's kind of the real quick overview of that. And I'll pause here partly to take a sip of coffee and partly to see if there are any questions. Okay. When can we use it? That's a fantastic question, and I don't have the answer to that. So yeah, one very big thing about GitHub Next is anything that's there, right now we don't have a roadmap. And if I'm being honest, not everything that finds its way into GitHub Next will find its way out into the wild. So there's still always a non-zero chance that this might not be released out, but it is something we're building. It's something we're looking at. It's something we want to ship. So we'll see what happens from there. Looks awesome. Cute. Yeah, I kind of like it. I kind of dig it. How about purge git commands like pull push, branch merging, etc.? Yeah. So Tom asked this great question. What about like pure git commands? And to kind of take this one step further here is, what about those? Let's see. Let me do a split screen. Let me just get myself back on screen. There we go. So like, what about those kind of more intriguing scenarios that'll be the word that I will use there, where maybe I've made a commit and I realized, oh, wait a minute, I need to undo like just one file of that, or maybe I pushed and I really didn't want to and I need to roll back to a prior commit and then push that out. Like how do I start to do that? And that really is kind of where we see this going, is being able to support those types of commands. So there's a great website out there. The PC version of it is, I think it's Oh Shoot Git. That if you just fire up your favorite search engine, just do a search for Oh Shoot Git, there's a non-PC version of the website as well. And it gives you a lot of like great help of like, hey, I made a mistake. How do I undo that? And that's kind of what we see for the CLI, is like those types of scenarios, especially when we're talking about Git, because any developer that's been using Git for, I don't know, more than about an hour and a half has probably made a mistake and went, oh, wait a minute, I need to do something different here. And so being able to ask the CLI, hey, I made a commit, but I need to roll back one file. How do I do this? Would be really helpful. So that's where we see this going, and where we see this being built out. So yeah. Let's see. Adam asked the question, and also including standard shell commands for like zip folders and SSH. Yeah, absolutely. That really is kind of where we see all of this. Luigi asks a question: what are the languages that are supported? So GitHub Copilot in general has been trained on publicly available code and text. And at the end of the day, it is a large language model. And basically, what's going to happen is that the more information that it has, the better the suggestions are that it's going to be able to make. That there's going to be a very tight relationship between those two between those two charts. So when it comes to what languages is this going to support, the more widely spoken a language is, the better the support that you're going to have. So if you're using, say, English, Spanish, Japanese, where there's a very uh, large amount of publicly available text in those languages, it's going to be able to support those languages really well. If you're using a language that's not as widely spoken, then you are going to notice that the support there isn't going to be as strong. And that's just simply the nature of large language models. So there isn't necessarily hey, this is the list of languages that it supports, but rather you will notice that the level of support that you're going to get will vary depending on just how much of that language it's seeing. So yeah. And then the follow-up question to that is it able to understand compiler errors and give you suggestions? I'm very glad that you asked that question, because that leads me perfectly into GitHub Copilot Chat, which I think is really where we want to kind of slide into next. So chances are you've already played around with ChatGPT. I'm going to kind of make that assumption. If you haven't already, you should definitely go do that. And what's wonderful about ChatGPT is that you get a chatbot style of experience, that I can ask a question, I can ask follow-up questions to it, and I'm going to get information back from it. So I can use it to get code snippets. I can use it to find out a bit more information about, fill in the blank here. Now, I love ChatGPT. I can sit around and kind of play around with ChatGPT for days and days and days. But when it comes to writing code, I find that ChatGPT is a little bit hit and miss. And part of it's because that's not what the tool is built for, that the tool is built to give back human style answers to questions. And so can it do code as part of that? Yes, absolutely. But that's not what it's tuned for. That's not its primary purpose. The other very big thing about ChatGPT is the fact that it isn't going to have as much context. That if I want to say, hey, create a controller that's going to be using Django, that's going to be a backend for a React app, that I'm going to have to explain all of this to ChatGPT before I can start to get any usable responses back from that. That's going to take a little while. And this is, of course, where GitHub Copilot, traditional GitHub Copilot, will really shine, because it's going to have all of that context, that it's right there inside of my IDE. So it sees the files that I have open, it sees the frameworks, the libraries that I'm using. And so when I ask those questions, it's going to give me those answers in context based on all of that information. But the real challenge that we wind up having when we're using our current version of GitHub Copilot, and again, do not get me wrong, I adore GitHub Copilot, but we wind up lacking an ability to kind of go back and forth. So that if I write out a comment, here, let me do this. Let's create a brand new file. Let's call this server.js, and let's add in a comment here. Where I say import Express. There we go. Oops. Oh, you know what? Oh, come on. Um, There we go. And then, cool. So you're going to notice that now as I'm doing my thing, it's already making those contexts. Sorry, bigger picture. Sorry about that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Boop. There we go. Okay, there we go. All right. So create my Express app. There we go. And then now um, start the server. That looks good. And then let me also use a body parser. There we go. Okay. So you'll notice that I'm able to like add in those comments and then get my code suggestions as I go. And that's wonderful. Like I love that feature. I love that capability. But the challenge that we wind up having there is if I'm looking to do any form of back and forth here, like maybe I want to find out a little bit more about this block of code, or I want to like get a suggestion, and if I don't like what I get, I want to go back and ask some follow-ups and those types of things. Doing that with comments isn't the most intuitive way to get in and do things. And so this is where having some form of chat really comes into play, so that now I can go, hey, describe this code for me. I can go, hey, find the bug or help me improve this code and those types of things. And I can now get those responses right here inside of my IDE with it knowing the context. So let's say, for example, that what I want to do is I want to create a Mongoose server here. So let's just ask Copilot. So I want to create a Mongoose model named speaker with, what do I want? Name, email, and LinkedIn URL. I can just ask it right here. And so now what it will do is it will give me the code that I want. So it will give me all of that right there. So there's my brand new schema. And then there is the model right there. So let's go ahead. Let's just inject that right here into my code. Let's just hit that little button right here, insert that cursor, and now that's right there. Cool. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. That's all now right there. Now, when I'm personally writing code, this is quite frequently the way that I do things, is that I will kind of do everything inside of like one file, and I'll play around and I'll get it to look the way that I want it to look. But as we all know, this is not really how I want this to eventually finish out. That eventually I'm going to want all of this Mongoose information somewhere else, so that I'm going to want this out on a separate file. So what I can now do is I can highlight this block of code, and I can now ask Copilot. I can go back to Copilot and say, hey, oops, hit the right button here. I can go back to Copilot and say, hey, help me out here. How can I extract this? And so it comes back and it tells me, hey, it looks like you want to extract the speaker schema object from the server. Here's the steps to do that. Select the schema object, copy it, create a new file, and then go ahead and paste that in. And then now I can have that out as a separate file. So let's do that. So let's come back over here. Boop. Sorry, right keystroke. There we go. Let's create a brand new file, models.js, and let's go ahead and paste that in. Come on. Oh, sorry. So I use Windows locally, but of course for work stuff I use a Mac. And my brain, because of the long weekend and I was doing an awful lot of work on my Windows system, my brain is still going Control X, Control V, and I'm now having to rewire it back to Command X, Command V. All right. So I created my brand new models right here, but I am noticing a bug. I am noticing that my speaker isn't working there. So let's see if there's if this will pick it up. So is there a problem with? I don't know if this is going to work. This is literally the first time I'm doing this. We're going to find out. Is there a problem with my code? Can't find a problem. Okay, experiencing any issues. Okay, I can't access speaker from outside models. There we go. So now it's going to give me the appropriate code to now export that out. So I went back and I said, hey, I can't access it. If I want to access it from the outside, what I need to do is export it. Here's how I could go ahead and modify it. And it gives me the full thing. And we notice down here at the very bottom that it's got that module exports. So now let's go ahead and copy that. And then let's paste that. Pretty slick. Now, what I also really like is that it even starts to give me kind of the next step. So with this modification, I can now import the speaker model in other files using require. All right, let's do that. So let's come over here, and then let's go ahead and just paste that code in, just like that. So now I've got my speaker. And now I'm even noticing that it's kind of suggesting the next question here, which is how can I use the speaker model in my express route handlers? All right, let's hit that. So now it's got a full little thing here. So it's got the, hey, here's your express, here's your speaker, here's the router, here's a router.get, and then here's how to export this out. So it's actually creating a full routes.js file for me. That's pretty slick. All right, so let's do it. Just going to kind of keep following along with what this is telling me to do. So let's say routes.js, and then I could go ahead and just paste that code in. So you'll notice what I'm doing here is that I'm kind of writing along and I'm kind of using this as a little bit of support. I'm asking it different questions and so forth, and really kind of getting some really nice guidance here on everything that I need to do, which is pretty slick. It's pretty slick. Okay, let me go back and kind of get caught up on some questions here. So Thomas asked a question. Copilot training data is based on open public GitHub repos. So it's publicly available code and text. So exactly where what it's been trained on hasn't been released, but it's publicly available code and text. A bit of a follow-up. Is this suitable for private repos? Is there some implied level of access to private code that should be necessary for this to work? Should be worried about code security, Matthew asks. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things here. So number one is I'm going to go back to, I want this slide here. There we go. Okay. And then I'm also going to bring myself back on. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So the way that GitHub Copilot works, and this is going to be true for Copilot CLI, for Copilot Chat, etc. Yeah, which is that these round trips right here are ephemeral. So when it's setting up that context and the suggestion is going back, when you're using GitHub Copilot for Business, this is ephemeral. None of this is going to be stored. So if you are using a private repository, what's going to happen is if the question that you ask or the code that you have here that's being sent up as part of the context, that will be sent up to Copilot. That's going to be used by Copilot to generate the suggestion, but then all of that will go away after that. So none of this is going to be stored. None of this is going to be used to retrain or to update the model or anything like that. So as far as code security or anything like that goes, we're not hanging on to any of your code. That we are working to keep your code safe by simply not storing it. Now, the next part of the question is, things like what about, say, IP, or what about, code security and so forth. And there's a couple of things that I always like to highlight there. Number one is the fact that if you go look at the terms and the license for GitHub Copilot for Business, it does talk about IP. It does talk about an indemnity clause, and you can go find out more information there. But the other part that I always like to highlight is the fact that when we think about how developers write code today, that there's only some percentage of that code that's going to be written out of whole cloth, that my developers just kind of doing their thing and they are generating all of that code all on their own. That almost every developer, I'm not even going to say almost, every single developer is looking at docs and they're copying and pasting from there. They're going out to coding forums like Stack Overflow and they're copying and pasting from there. They're going to ChatGPT, they're going out to Google. And so my developers are always using other sources and other resources to generate their code. And so even before any other tools are introduced, we always still wanted to make sure that we had process in place to check for things like IP, to check for code security. And none of this changes that. So whatever it is that you are currently doing, you should still keep doing that. And in turn, if you're not already doing something like that, you probably should be already, again, regardless of any tool like GitHub Copilot or otherwise. So yeah. And then kind of the follow-up to there when it comes to like attribution and all of that, the exact same rules apply. The last thing that I'm going to mention on all of that is there is a post by Ryan Salva. There we go. I want this and this. There we go. So there is a post by Ryan Salva, who runs, helps manage everything with GitHub Copilot, who has talked about creating tools that will give you an ability to start to see where your code comes from, if there are any public matches and things like that. So you can go check out his blog post for a bit more information on all of that and kind of get a bit more of a sense. So yeah. Okay. Luigi asked a question, can I push company policies, for example, naming things in Pascal case or camel case to avoid specific libraries, includes, etc.? Great question. So the short answer to that is there isn't a way to directly point GitHub Copilot at what you want it to. I'm going to try that sentence all over again. At present, there is not a specific way to put your thumb on the scale of GitHub Copilot and specifically say, always do this, always do this. However, GitHub Copilot is context aware. So in other words, it's going to generate suggestions that are not only based on its publicly available code, the model that it's got, but also based on your context. So if it sees that you're always using a particular style for your variables, or that you're always using a particular style for like tabbing and things like that, then it's going to follow along with that as well. So the suggestions that it makes are going to follow along with that. So if you're already using some set of requirements, like maybe you're using PEP8, let's say in Python, and you're writing your code, then GitHub Copilot will typically follow along with that because it's going to see that context. So there isn't necessarily a way to go, hey, always do this. But if you've got code that's already following those patterns, that structure, then GitHub Copilot is going to typically follow right along with that as well. Mohammed asked the question, will it work the same way in Visual Studio 2022? I'm not exactly sure what it is, so let me answer that in two different ways. First up, when it comes to the current version of GitHub Copilot, yes, that it's going to work in line, and as I'm doing my thing, all of that will behave the exact same way. When it comes to Copilot Chat, as of right now, Copilot Chat is specific to Visual Studio Code that will eventually find its way to other IDEs as it continues to mature and hopefully gets released out. But again, there's no timelines on any of that at the moment. Okay. Adam asked the question, assume there is embedding of local code stored somewhere and then semantic search performed to inject context into the prompt. It's very cool, but one question is where the embedded semantic search is performed. I'm not entirely sure, and at least based on my understanding of the way that GitHub Copilot works, I don't think that that's exactly how that works. So that the way that I understand it is that that context that's being sent up, that's all of your files that are open. That's the code that you're currently writing. That's what's going to be sent up, and then the suggestions are generated in the cloud, sent back, and again, all of this winds up going away. So I don't think that there's necessarily anything that's stored locally. I could be wrong on that, but that's at least my understanding of the way that GitHub Copilot works. I don't have the perfect answer to that, or at least the way that I understand the way that GitHub Copilot works doesn't necessarily work that way. No, there's a setting on the GitHub Copilot page. Allow GitHub to use my code snippets to improve product improvements. Not sure how this plays into if there's a difference between individual and business. Okay, so Justin asked this question, and I'm going to summarize this here real quick. There is, do I have the slide on this? I don't have a slide on it. That's fine. Okay. All right. Can I just do this? I can't find. Sorry, just trying to, there we go. All right. Come on. There we go. All right. So just to ask the question, if you go into Copilot, you might notice, hey, I want to allow my my interactions to improve Copilot. With the current version of GitHub Copilot, there's actually two SKUs, so two subsets, if you will, of it. And that is GitHub Copilot for individuals and GitHub Copilot for business. With GitHub Copilot for business, so specifically the business SKU, specifically the business product, this transaction right here, context being sent up, suggestion going back down, that is ephemeral. So that is a one-time shot. That's it. None of your code, none of the suggestions are ever used to update, to retrain, to improve the model. None of that is being stored. For Copilot for individual, that's different, and that now becomes an option for the individual. So the individual can say, yes, I want this to be stored, and I want this to be used to improve, or they can choose not. So for business, we just make that answer, and that answer is always going to be no. So that answer is, this is always going to be ephemeral. For individual, it then does become up to the individual to decide whether or not they want that to happen or not. So totally up to the individual there. So that's one of the biggest differences between the individual and the business version of that. Beyond that, the business version does include a couple of other features. Part of it, of course, will be user management. So you can control who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it, what orgs have access to it, and eventually even what repos are going to be allowed to use it and not use it. You also do have an option for Copilot for Business to choose whether or not you want to block or allow suggestions to be made that match publicly available code. So you can choose whether or not you want that to just be hidden or if you want that to be shown. So that's another option that you get inside of Copilot for Business. So that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up, Justin. Shalev, and please forgive me if I mispronounced that name. Are there plans to make chat available in Vim as well? Question applies to the rest of the products you're showing us today. So there are, I don't think I have the slide on this one. For the current version of GitHub Copilot, there are plugins available for NeoVim, for the JetBrains suite of IDEs, Visual Studio, and Visual Studio Code. So that is the current version of GitHub Copilot. For Copilot Chat, which would be the one that would be most applicable to having a plugin, right now, it's solely for Visual Studio Code. I assume that eventually it will become available on the other IDEs, but right now, it's just Visual Studio Code. Now, specific to Vim, if you're just using Vim, unfortunately, not available there. Even GitHub Copilot, it's going to be NeoVim. So if you're looking for at least something there, that's the way that would work. Perfect. Okay. Slab, thank you. Thank you. Anne asked the question, can we specify which files to look for? The use case would be to create a backend API for a specific form, let's say context.js in the front end. Fantastic question. So the direct answer is sort of. I love that was my direct answer. My direct answer is sort of. The direct answer is sort of. So when Copilot is looking to generate its context, it's going to look, of course, at the file that you currently have and at the files that are currently open. So let's talk a little bit about what GitHub Copilot is trying to do here. It's really trying to walk a very fine line between giving you the best possible suggestions, but to do so as quickly as possible. So if we have and I'm going to over exaggerate here, but let's say we've got like a 5-second latency. So I type out a comment and then it takes 5 seconds to get a response back from Copilot. Quite frankly, at that point, Copilot's useless to me, that it's just not going to be able to keep up. That if I'm having to wait 5 seconds to get a response, I'm already out of the zone. Like my brain has already moved on to the next thing. So we need to make sure that latency is as low as possible. So we want to get those answers back like near instantaneous. But of course, we want to, at the same time, make sure that we're giving you the best possible quality that we can. And that's where the trade-off comes into play, because the more information that we send up and the longer that we're going to take to process, the greater the latency is going to be. But at the same time, the more information that we send up, the more time that we take, the better the responses are going to be. So there's a trade-off to be made here. So the way that Copilot works is it's going to focus its attention on the files that you have open. So it is not, for example, like let's say that I am referencing a file somewhere else. Like I've got a link to a file somewhere else inside of an app that I'm building. It's not going to follow that link. So it's not going to be doing like an awful lot of work on the file system and trying to get everything that it possibly can about your project to then in turn give you the suggestion, because doing that is going to slow things down. Again, we've got that trade-off there. So the way that it's optimized is it's going to look at the file that you have, and it's going to look at the files that you currently have open. So if you have, let's say, context.js, there's my form, and now I want to create the backend for that, open that file. And that now will be used by Copilot as part of its context. So you're not able to specifically say, hey, go look at this file. But if you open the file, if you have that open on the tab, then that will help it out and help point it in the right direction. Now, for me personally, if you're anything like me, and I know I am, I have a propensity to just open up a whole bunch of files, just keep a whole bunch of files open, and I'm just kind of doing my thing. So I find that naturally I will have the files open that are related to whatever it is that I'm working on. So I think it's relatively rare. I'm not going to say never because I'm sure that I have at one point, but it's relatively rare where I've ever had to stop and go, oh, let me open up another file and kind of help Copilot out, point it in the right direction. Because I just find that as I'm doing my normal development, that I will have the files open that are going to help Copilot out there. So the direct answer to the question is there isn't a way to just go, hey, use this. But if you have the file open, that's going to help it out with that. But again, I don't want to like hammer that point home too much because sometimes when I say, hey, open up the files and that's going to help Copilot out, a lot of people will just then get tunnel visioned on that. And they'll start to think, oh my gosh, now I really have to think about all the files that I have open and things like that. And my answer to that is probably not. That just through the normal course of your development, that you're just going to find that you'll have the right files open. Like think about how you do development, or think about like how you use your phone, that chances are when you use an app and you decide, hey, I'm going to close this, that you're not just like, closing out all the apps on your phone. You're just moving on to the next one. Kind of the same thing here, that when you work on a file, chances are you're going to kind of keep doing your same thing there. Okay. Cool. Let's see. And then Thomas asked the question, it seems like a bit of a waste that larger organizations are not able to use federated learning model or appending to extend local Copilot models. Great question. Thank you, Thomas. I want to go back here. Okay, so I'm back on Copilot Next. I'm going to scroll down on Copilot Next, and I want right here, GitHub Copilot for your code base. So the question that Thomas asks about being able to train GitHub Copilot on your code base is one of the 2 or 3 most common questions that I get asked anytime that I'm doing a presentation for a business on Copilot. And this is something that we are looking at implementing, that we are trying to build out. So it's something that's there. Believe it or not, though, this is something that does become a little bit tricky, that there's a couple of challenges that we wind up facing. The first of which is, again, this is a large language model, and almost sort of like regardless of how big your code base is, the training model that we have is going to be exponentially larger than the amount of code that you have. And in turn, it's a large language model. The more that you've got, the better the suggestions are going to wind up being. So inherently, that generic code base that we have is going to be able to offer better suggestions than training it specific to your code base. Now, that being said, where having your code base be trained can really become helpful is, number one, kind of help guide it and point it in a particular direction. But also number 2 is if you've got your own custom languages or you've got your own custom frameworks, then it can help Copilot get a better understanding for what's going on there. But at the same time, there's also an additional challenge of, okay, so we're going to use your local code base as well to help point Copilot in the right direction. And now there's like some throttling. Now there's like some dials to be set of how much should we favor sort of the generic, if you will, Copilot versus the Copilot that's been trained on your code base, to again try to make sure that we find the best possible suggestions that we can make out there. So as it turns out, it's a far more challenging of a problem than it might look at first glance. So it is something that we are investigating. It is something that we are working on. But right now, I don't necessarily have any more information beyond that. But I do want to follow that up. I do want to kind of close that out by kind of going back one more time to that context. So let's say that we've got a custom language, or a custom library that we've built, and I need to use that custom library. If I've got 2 or 3 files that are already using that library, open those files up, make sure that those files are open, and that will then become part of that context. So as Copilot starts making those suggestions, it's going to be able to use that context to help guide it through that. So it's a great question. It turns out that it's a far more challenging of a problem. As of right now, what you can do again is just keep a couple of files open, and that will help open it up. Yeah, so, not talking only about training on local data, but more appending the total model with your local source. Yeah, yeah. Again, like, and I hear all of that, and it just it winds up becoming relatively tricky because there's just an awful lot to try and balance out. So right now, the way that it's built is it's the files that you have open, the code that you currently have, and that might change over time. That, we're constantly looking for ways to improve the suggestions, ways to improve the model, ways to improve the experience. And so over time, that is something that might change. But at least as of right now, that's the way that this is built. That's the way that this is going to work. Okay. Other questions? I'm loving this. This is great. I don't know if you've noticed, but I kind of enjoy talking about GitHub Copilot. Take one more sip of coffee here. Okay. Thoughts on bias risks? I'm going to pass on that question. It's a good question. I'm going to pass. Okay. Yeah. How would GitHub handle, so just to ask a question, how would GitHub handle subscriptions if a user has an individual license and then requests a business license from the org? Would the individual subscription and or privacy settings get canceled out? Yes, this is a fantastic question. This is something that comes up quite frequently. Is, a developer goes off, they sign up for GitHub Copilot on their own, and then their organization goes, hey, we really like GitHub Copilot. Let's get everybody signed up for business. The business subscription will override the individual. So if you're using the individual's GitHub account, so the individual's handle, then the Copilot for Business setting will override their individual setting. So that's a great question. That's something that comes up quite frequently. So let me ask the question, what's the most exciting product coming with Copilot X in your opinion? Oh gosh. It's almost like asking me to pick my favorite child, even though I don't have any kids. Probably Copilot Chat. I think all of them have a little bit to offer. I do want to talk about the other two here in a minute here, but probably Copilot Chat with, honestly, this Copilot for pull requests is a really close second, which I'll talk about in a second here. But yeah. Mohammed asked the question, are waiting list acceptances for everyone? Is profile being studied prior to approval? I don't know what the official answer is. My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, so please bear that in mind. My understanding is right now, Copilot for Individual, if you sign up for the waiting list, it is in order. So I do not believe that it's based on the profile. I believe that it is based on order. I could be wrong on that. But what I do know for right now is that Copilot for Individual is being favored a little bit over Copilot for Business for a couple of different reasons. But the one part that I can say with 100% certainty is that if you are already signed up for Copilot, that is going to get you priority in the waiting list. So keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's talk about the other two features here with Copilot X. So first up is Copilot for pull requests. Copilot for pull requests is going to do two big things. So number one is it's going to be able to detect on a pull request whether or not you have unit tests. And if you don't have unit tests, then it will be able to create another pull request that suggests unit tests for the one that you created, which I really appreciate. The second is it can also then suggest and generate both a title and a summary for you of that pull request. One of my biggest peeves when it comes to pull requests is a lack of information, that you might get a generic title and then like nothing in the description. And a lot of times that title is fixes bug. Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. I'm glad that it fixes a bug. Kind of hope that it would fix a bug. But what bug? How did it fix it? How did you detect the bug? How are you demonstrating that it now works? And that information quite frequently doesn't find its way into the description. And do not get me wrong, I get it. There isn't a developer in the world that hasn't fought with a bug for hours and hours and hours, finally found the fix. They got all excited about finding the fix. Don't get me wrong. They implement the fix. They go to make the PR, and now they're just tired. And now they're just exhausted. And now their brain is just not thinking straight. And so they really just want to get that PR made. They just want to get through that process. They want to start running whatever automation it is that needs to be run. And then that's it. And so that's all they're really focused on. And so now they don't wind up putting in a good description. I get it. That happens. That's where Copilot for pull requests comes into play, is it's going to then make those types of suggestions for you, which is great. The other big one is Copilot for docs. And this is probably the one that's, I think, least talked about, but one of the most exciting to me. I was a technical trainer for many, 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 many years. And so as a result, I have a lot of experience in trying to help individuals learn new skills, learn new languages, learn new frameworks, etc. And one of the challenges that I always have with documentation is that documentation assumes a certain knowledge level. So let's say, for example, that I've got a new developer and they know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And now I want to turn them loose on React. And I'm not picking on React. I could have picked any JavaScript framework there. I just happen to pick React. So I'm not picking on React there. If I go into the React docs are going to assume that I know quite a bit. And quite honestly, what's going to wind up happening is I really start to get into those docs is that they're going to assume that I know quite a bit about React as I'm digging in with those docs. And this is something that unfortunately just happens quite often inside of documentation, is that a lot of times the people that are writing documentation, and again, like, I'm not trying to in any way, shape, or form talk bad about anybody. But one of the things that just happens is part of human nature is that the people who are writing docs are writing it based on their own experience. They're writing it from their viewpoint. And so in turn, the target audience that they have is themselves. And they wind up then sort of assuming a level of knowledge that not everybody is going to have. And so it makes it very hard for a novice developer to get in and get started on fill-in framework here by going through the documentation. This is where Copilot for Docs is really going to shine. That what you're going to be able to do is specify, hey, this is the level of developer I have. So I could be like an advanced developer, but maybe it's my first time ever using React. Like maybe I'm an Angular developer. So I know Angular, but I don't know React at all. Then I could go ahead and I could scroll that down and say, hey, I don't know this really well. And then over here on the response, but I could say, you can be a little bit advanced when you're talking back to me. So like, I don't need things explained very low level. Like, you can talk to me here, but I just don't know really anything about React. So I can adjust those sliders here, and then I can ask my query and then get a response back based on the profile that I've built right here. And so now it's going to help make that documentation that much more consumable for me as a developer, as an experienced developer, as a novice developer. And what I also really like, and unfortunately I don't have a demo of this, but what I also really like about Copilot for Docs is the fact that it will also give me a link to where it found that information. So if I go in and I say, hey, how do I create a component, or how do I, do something with, oh, why can I not think of, oh, Redux. That was what I was trying to think of. My brain just stopped there for a second. Like, how do I do something with, React Redux or something like that? I can go in and I could ask that question, and now I'm going to get back a response. I'm going to get back a response that's going to be targeted for the style of developer that I've specified here, and then in turn, I'm going to be able to get links back to the documentation, so I can very quickly see where that information came from. I can dig deeper into it if I want to, and I think most importantly is then it's a great way for me to confirm that, yes, this is in fact the right information, that this is in fact the information that I was looking for. So this is probably the one that's slept on most often, and it's one of my absolute favorites, and that is Copilot for Docs. So those are the other two components that are part of Copilot X. And unfortunately, I don't have demos of those two, but I did at least want to highlight those. So questions on those? And I'm going to pause again for coffee. Okay. Let's see. I want to go back to this slide here. There we go. Okay. So based on sort of the hush silence, I always assume that hush silence is a, hey, everything is fantastic. Oh, Q&A tab. I've just been focused in on the public. I just saw this Q&A tab. Let me kind of go back through this real quick. Has the GitHub team faced any challenges development of the CLI thus far? None that I know of, or at least none that's been shared with me. Hayden asked that question. Thomas asked the question. I answered that question already. And then Marius asked the question, is there going to be a publicly documented API rather, for building integrations into IDEs? That's a great question. None that I have heard of. So as far as I know, there's no plans for that. That might change, but at least as of right now, there's no plans for that. So yeah, Thomas needs to go feed the family. Go enjoy that. Thanks for the interest. Thank you for tuning in. Cool. All right. I want to close with this, which is Copilot X, like I mentioned, is a set of explorations into different areas where we believe that generative AI can help support developers. And so this is going to be Copilot Chat, CLI, PRs, docs, etc. Now, everything that is under this Copilot X umbrella, right now, this is part of GitHub Next. GitHub Next is our playground. So anything that's inside of GitHub Next, it might get released. It might not be released. And even if it is released, it might be a single product. It might be rolled into something else, etc. And there's also, as of right now, no roadmap. So kind of keep all of that in mind as we're talking about GitHub Copilot X. If you do want to get signed up for the wait lists, you can check out that little link down at the very bottom. gh.io/CopilotX. Go check that out and go sign up. The other very big thing that I'm going to strongly recommend that everybody do is go check out Copilot for Business. And I'm suggesting this for two reasons. Partly A, because if you are already a subscriber for Copilot, that is going to get you priority on the waitlist. But also number two is so that way you can start to see what it is that Copilot can do for you. That, since the release of Copilot X, like, yes, this is very much like the cool new kid in school. I get it, and I get why, it's getting all of the attention. But, we also need to keep in mind that we've got this really, really cool product back here called GitHub Copilot that will help support your developers as they're writing code right there inside of their IDE. So don't forget about core GitHub Copilot. Like I said at the top here, I have not seen a product that's had a larger impact on my productivity than GitHub Copilot. So do remember that that's there. Definitely go check that out as well. So yeah, if there are any other questions, please by all means feel free to ask in the comments below. You can always reach out to us startups at github.com. We'll answer your questions there. And then keep an eye on this space. We are hosting these types of monthly talks. And if there's a particular topic that you would like to see us cover, please, by all means, ask. That's how we're going to know, what it is that you want to hear, and then we can make sure that we can help you get up and running. So yeah. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Today is Tuesday. Yesterday was a holiday, so my brain said it was Monday for a second there. So enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Bye.